Welcome to this week's episode of The Sacred Path. I will be your guide, Rothi Midran Apkalu. On tonight's episode, we will be discussing an important part of the journey, caring for the world around us, living in harmony with your environment, and the work that's required in order to create a sustainable ecosystem. As you know, if you've been a listener for a while, I'm in the high desert of Colorado, which is beautiful with the majestic Mount Blanca in the distance, but the elements here are no joke. To begin with, our average rainfall is less per year than Death Valley. In total, we get less than 8 inches of precipitation per year. To compound matters, the winters frequently get below 0 degrees for the overnight lows, although that's changed in the last couple of years due to the Earth's shift and the polar changes, but that's supposedly due to global warming, but we know the truth. Frequently we get winds in excess of 50 miles an hour, all this at the elevation of 7,500 plus feet, which risks the sun scorching our seeds and plants if it is too direct. Perhaps you are now starting to see why property here is cheap in the area. I'm in the process of purchasing 40 acres located right on the highway with great accessibility, currently acting as caretaker for the lands. As of now, in addition to the garden, soil, and landscape costs to remediate the lands, there is also fees for the well and septic, each of which could cost in excess of $10,000. Due to the fact that the well would have to be dug to 150 feet approximately. And the septic would have to be done in hard clay soil predominantly. I have many people who speak of living off-grid and returning to a life of solace and tranquility. In tonight's episode, I will be discussing what exactly is required to do that. While prices for the land and regulations vary and differ from no matter where you choose, there are several constants. The environment and weather will create challenges. The challenges may be different, but there will be challenges no matter where you are. If you are by chance somewhere that does not have beautiful weather all year round, the prices for the land will be prohibitively expensive. Living off-grid is not like camping or fishing when it becomes a lifestyle and a lifetime commitment. Items we take for granted, such as laundry and bathing, become more of a concern. I'm blessed that I'm 10 miles from town on a main U.S. highway, so I still have fairly good access to most of life's amenities while I transition to a self-sustaining life. This is an important consideration if you aim to grow your own crops or raise your own animals, as we ultimately intend to. It will take time and resources before they are at the stage where they can be utilized for food. Initially, the areas for the animals will need to be fenced in because of the fact there are many animals and predators in the area that would be very happy to feed on your bunny rabbits and other critters. And bunny rabbits are here as well to feed on your garden. So all things have to be protected from the elements of not only nature, but of the very animals and elements of nature that exist here already. And they will all need water, as well as ability to contain their fecal remain to turn it into compost so that you can have a safe and clean environment. Our current water needs are met through weekly trips to the aquifer and spring that is a few miles from us, where we bring our jerry jugs and barrels to be filled. It is more work than having city water, but the water quality is well worth it until we have our own well here, an aquifer, which, as we mentioned, will require piping going down 150 feet for a standard well. The aquifer, to access it, has to go another 100 feet approximately, down to 238 feet, 240 feet. And if one is fortunate enough to dig down to 450 feet, they can access the artesian water that is heated by geothermal energies and have our own hot springs. This is all in our plans, but as for right now, we're still transporting water from the aquifer that is dug by the city and close to us by a few miles. Anyone who doesn't truly appreciate the value of water has never had to carry it by hand without a vehicle. As I mentioned, we get less than 8 inches of water per year, which is not much, but add that up over 40 acres, which is about approximately 1,000 feet wide and a half a mile deep. That's a lot of water if it is utilized and directed to the garden areas, which brings us to our current state of development on the lands. That of site selection and preparation. Our soil is made of mixture primarily clay and sand, almost spotted like the landscape on the landscape like a Palomino horse. Oddly enough, when the winds are strong enough, with the winds in a strong non-directional pattern as they are, some areas remain consistently clay, which we will be digging out for ponds, and other areas remain as sand and silt. There are certain areas, these patterns have not changed in the 1.5 to 2 years that I've been here, oddly enough. Even though the landscape has determined the garden and pond areas, there is still much site prep to do. The main plants that grow here are sage, both white and silver, which we are retaining, along with adding colored sages and other related plants. We will be also adding patches of pampas grass, which is a desert grass from Argentina, which we are integrating into a more colorful species of it, as well as retaining the native cactus and succulents, with more cactus and succulents planned to be added in the future. There's also tumbleweeds and saltbush that are invasive. The tumbleweeds I addressed the first year I was here, killing hundreds of them and burning them so that they did not turn to seed. Now we're in the process of taking the same pattern and attacking the invasive saltbush, which is a process that needs to be done gradually over the entire 40 acres, potentially the neighboring 40 acres which are adjacent, which we are looking into obtaining, partially because it already has a well and septic, although the well is dried up from the sands. Nothing that can't be remedied, though. Once the invasive plants are removed, the next step each garden is to evaluate the natural landscape, watching the water patterns as well as the wind path, which can be very interesting. We get scenes here that look like they came right out of Hollywood in The Mummy, with the sand tornadoes. As you can see, there is much work ahead of us. I'm blessed to have a companion here to assist me, in addition to my dog, who's actually a good worker. He digs good and is actually really good at pulling out weeds and assisting with that area of gardening, although not always digging where we want him to, but he listens pretty well on that. Landscaping an entire 40 acres takes a lot of work, and seeds, plants, and trees. We can use all of your assistance and support to help make this a reality. If you can't send money, send plants, seeds, soil, or compost, in addition to various building materials for using to create our underground greenhouse, which we're in the process of digging. Our initial batch of small trees, which we have located, is running us approximately $150, not including the topsoil and fertilizer needed. The early crops of plants and seeds for the food garden will cost us another $150, and another $100 for the soil and related products. That's a total of $400 we need to cover our startup expenses before May 15th, ideally. Summer crops will run at least another $500. If we do the right historic and heritage crops that we want to, it will run closer to $1,000. But ultimately, these will be investments, and the products will pay for themselves because we will be able to save seeds from the plants that we collect and harvest. So we will be able to reuse them the next year, and we'll only have the initial investment. As mentioned, there are also household expenses and eventually permits, plus the dues on the land itself. Living off-grid, being free, so to speak, has a price. It requires a change in lifestyle in addition to the cost of the land, the permits, improvements, and living expenses until you become self-sufficient. All said and done, well over $100,000 is not unheard of to cover our startup expenses for the purchase of the 40 acres and the work which will need to be done. We are blessed to be where we are and have a more peaceful life and a cabin to stay in with a wood stove to fend off the elements, but even still it requires much work. We've been stripping pallets and using the materials as building material, insulating the walls with cardboard and covering it with slats from the skids, giving the interior a rustic pattern, very fitting with the land itself, raw and primitive. Greening the desert is no easy task. It will take much time, effort, and planning, not to mention resources. I've been studying permaculture for several years. For those not familiar with the term, it is the process of integrating a natural ecosystem concepts to adapt the environment into a symbiotic and self-sustaining landscape. It takes a lot of work, especially since we are doing it on a fairly large scale, 40 acres in the high desert, which has very extreme conditions. This is the reason. There is a reason I took my time in starting the remediation of the lands. Primarily the fact it allowed me 1 year, and in fact 2 winters, to evaluate the weather conditions, since we are surrounded by mountains on all sides, and at 7,500 feet in elevation, there are many microclimates here and many changes. At times, our weather seems different than that across the highway, and almost always is different than the mountains surrounding us to any direction, as well as that in town just 10 miles away. According to the Department of Agriculture, we are in a Zone 7B, but in my own observations over the last 2 years, winters which I have been here, we have been seldom below zero, and if we were, it was not for an extended period. This actually puts our climate in Zone 6B or possibly even 7, which gives us a whole new world of potential, although the water issue needs to be addressed and the soil needs to be remediated to grow anything. As already mentioned, water is an issue, and because of the limited availability here, even if we had our own well, we would be limited to 1 acre irrigation using natural traditional farming methods. Being a dragon and an elemental mage, however, we don't really follow tradition or rules for that matter, which is why we will be able to completely transform the entire 40 acres because of the fact we will be doing it in a sustainable method that will not require additional watering once the plants are established. We have begun to apply some unconventional methods to prepare the garden beds. We left the sage and the desert grasses in place to pay tribute to the natural landscape, and will indeed be planting other sage plants that are more colorful, and other desert grasses and reeds that will act as a windbreak and provide us with materials to weave into walls and structures. From there, we broke up all the soil where the gardens are with a pick, removing it one section at a time and placing newspaper down to act as a wick to carry moisture and a moisture barrier, then replacing the old soil, followed by topsoil and natural fertilizer. This process has just begun. We still have many, many acres ahead of us and areas to clear. The areas have been cleared, but we have not laid down the basis of the beds for hardly any of them because there is much, much work to be done. We're in the process of also creating irrigation channels next to the gardens, as well as ponds. Clearing 40 acres alone is a daunting chore for 2 people and a dog who's good at digging and pulling roots, not to mention preparing every garden bed in this method. The amount of trees and other plants needed for the landscape and for wind control, which is a serious concern, as we mentioned. Living off-grid isn't always easy, and remediation of land in the high desert is damn near impossible to most, but I'm not most. Nor do I align myself with common people who lack visions and motivation. The beauty, peace, and improved quality of life for not only myself, but others who join me here. Most notably my companion, who has lived here with me since last fall. Their addition to the community, which is being created, is not unnoticed. They've been a true friend, an ally, and an asset to the plans and developments, and continue to be a great asset and a friend. As you can see now, while living off-grid and being sustainable can be very peaceful and rewarding, it takes a great investment in both labor and resources to make it possible. I would like to ask my listeners, if they are able, please donate, help us.